The Galactic Dominion had existed for over 10,000 years, a vast empire of conquerors, slavers, and warlords. It had crushed hundreds of civilizations under its rule, absorbing their resources, enslaving their populations, and erasing any memory of resistance. The Dominion did not negotiate. It did not compromise. It only conquered. And then it made a mistake, a colossal one. They attacked Earth. The beginning of the end. Supreme Warlord Zalzareth of the Dominion stood in the command hall of the Oblivion's grasp, his personal dreadnought. He stared at the holographic display of the Sol system, his reptilian eyes narrowing. The Dominion had discovered this insignificant system on the outer fringes of the galaxy, occupied by a minor species, one the Dominion scholars had dismissed as primitive, short-lived, and unworthy of diplomatic engagement. In Zalzareth's mind, it was a simple operation. Send in a subjugation fleet, establish orbital dominance, demand surrender, kill any who resist, just as the Dominion had done 100 times before. He turned to his adjutant, a lower-ranked warrior who stood nervously before him. "What is the status of the invasion fleet?" "The first wave has entered the system, Supreme Warlord," the adjutant answered. 3 dreadnoughts, 10 heavy cruisers, and supporting vessels are moving into orbit over the 3rd planet. "Good. Have they begun orbital bombardment?" A pause. The adjutant hesitated. "No, Supreme Warlord. They sent a demand for surrender first." Zalzareth's mandibles flared in disgust, weakness. He had no patience for such formalities. The Dominion thrived on overwhelming brutality. Offering an enemy a chance to surrender was a waste of time. "Then I assume the humans have already submitted?" he asked. His voice thick with contempt. The adjutant swallowed. "They responded." Zalzareth turned fully, his heavy battle armor glinting under the chamber's lights. "What did they say?" The adjutant hesitated before playing the transmission. A human man appeared on the holoscreen. He was middle-aged, his face lined with battle scars. Behind him was a war-torn city, smoke and fire rising into the sky. His uniform was blood-stained, his armor scorched. And yet he smiled. When he spoke, it wasn't with fear, it was with amusement. "You just attacked the deadliest species in the galaxy. Congratulations." Then he cut the transmission. Zalzareth's blood ran cold. Something was wrong. This wasn't the response of a species that feared annihilation. It was the response of a species that had been waiting for a fight. The first mistake. The Dominion did not take threats lightly. The invasion fleet opened fire. Gigaton-class plasma beams rained down on Earth's cities, reducing entire metropolises to rubble. Missile strikes shattered orbital defenses. Thousands of Dominion dropships descended upon human soil, unloading tens of thousands of heavily armored shock troops, their monstrous war machines rolling forward with absolute confidence. They expected the battle to be over in hours. It lasted 4 minutes before everything went to hell. The first Dominion warship exploded in orbit, destroyed by a human nuke that had been disguised as a distress beacon. The second was crippled when a hacked Dominion AI turned its own weapons against itself. On the ground, Dominion forces marched through the ruined streets of New London, expecting weak, broken resistance. Instead, they were ambushed by human soldiers using guerrilla tactics, homemade explosives, and sheer unrelenting savagery. The Dominion had crushed species before, but they had never fought humans. Zalzareth watched the battle unfold, his claws digging into the armrests of his throne. He saw footage of Dominion warriors, battle-hardened conquerors, being torn apart by human resistance fighters wielding nothing but scavenged weapons and sheer animalistic determination. He saw humans hijacking Dominion walkers, repurposing them against their former owners. He saw entire Dominion battalions wiped out because the humans fought like nothing the Dominion had ever encountered. They weren't fighting for victory, they were fighting for revenge. The fall of the First Fleet. Zalzareth's personal communications link flared to life. It was Admiral Vec-Thar, commander of the invasion fleet. His expression was pure panic. "Supreme Warlord," the Admiral gasped. "We have vastly underestimated the humans. Our losses are catastrophic." Zalzareth clenched his fists. "You are Dominion. Show them no mercy." The Admiral hesitated. "We already did." Zalzareth frowned. "What?" "They do not surrender," Vec-Thar whispered. "They fight until the last breath. They set their own cities ablaze just to deny us ground. They turned nuclear weapons on their own soil just to take us down with them." Zalzareth's blood chilled. They fear nothing. A sudden explosion rocked the flagship, alarms blaring. A new voice came through the channel, an officer shouting frantically. Supreme Warlord, the humans they have stolen a Dominion battleship. What? Zalzareth bellowed. He turned to the main view screen and saw it. A captured Dominion dreadnought, its weapons turning against its former fleet. Another explosion. Then another. One by one, Dominion ships fell to their own technology, hijacked, infiltrated, and repurposed by human forces. Zalzareth had made a mistake, the greatest mistake in the history of the Galactic Dominion. He had thought he was invading a weak, primitive species. Instead, he had provoked the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. And now, the war had only just begun. The Galactic Dominion had expected a slaughter. They got one, but not the one they had envisioned. The first Dominion invasion fleet, their unstoppable armada, their mighty war machine, was now nothing more than a graveyard of burning wreckage orbiting Earth. The surviving ships had fled, broken and humiliated. The Dominion's greatest warriors lay dead, their bodies scattered across ruined battlefields. And the humans? They had only just begun. Retaliation, Earth's war councils convened in underground bunkers, deep within reinforced strongholds, surrounded by the smoldering remains of their once proud cities. The Dominion had devastated the planet. Millions were dead. Countries had been shattered. But humanity was still alive. And that meant the Dominion had made a fatal mistake. Admiral Evelyn Kasari, Supreme Commander of Earth's military forces, stood before a holographic war table in the last functional military command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. The remaining leaders of humanity, generals, admirals, and scientists, gathered around her. Their faces were grim, their bodies weary, but their eyes burned with purpose. They came to wipe us out, Kasari said, her voice cold and steady. Now we do the same to them. No one spoke, they only nodded. There would be no peace talks, no negotiations, no pleas for mercy. Humanity had been given no quarter. And now, neither would the Dominion, stealing their weapons. The Dominion's technological superiority had been undeniable. Their ships were larger, their weapons were more advanced, their armor was near impenetrable. But humanity had an advantage the Dominion never saw coming: their ability to adapt. The stolen Dominion dreadnought, the Tyrant's Bane, now floated in high orbit over Earth. It was the first of many captured ships, its systems being stripped apart and studied by human engineers and hackers. Dominion warships were meant to be impossible to operate without biolinked access, their interfaces designed specifically for their own species. Humans hacked that in less than 72 hours. Commander Daniel Rourke, the leader of the Tyrant's Bane hijacking operation, stood on its bridge, watching the human engineers at work. The Dominion's advanced plasma cannons were being recalibrated. Their navigation AI was being rewritten. Their engines were being modified to push past their original limits. Rourke smirked. The Dominion had spent centuries perfecting conquest. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting warfare. The counterattack begins. The first human counterattack did not come as a fleet invasion. It came as an insurgency. Across the Dominion's vast empire, dozens of enslaved species had been forced to submit to their rule, beaten, broken, and pacified by centuries of oppression. Until now. The news of humanity's victory at Earth spread like wildfire. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Dominion had lost a war, and that changed everything. Rebellions exploded across Dominion-controlled worlds. Weapons depots were raided, slave labor forces revolted against their masters, entire Dominion garrisons were wiped out overnight. And the humans? They weren't just watching, they were leading the charge. Using the Tyrant's Bane as their flagship, humanity launched a series of hit-and-run attacks deep into Dominion territory. They didn't engage in open warfare. They couldn't, not yet. But they didn't need to. They hijacked Dominion supply lines, cutting off food and ammunition to entire fleets. They ambushed Dominion warships, boarding them and leaving them as drifting wrecks. They hacked into Dominion communication networks, sending false orders and sowing chaos within their ranks. And then they struck their first true blow. The battle for Velrath. Velrath was a heavily fortified supply world, one of the Dominion's key industrial planets, responsible for fueling their entire war effort in the region. Humanity didn't want to conquer it, they wanted to erase it. Using the Tyrant's Bane, Rourke and his strike team infiltrated the Velrath system, slipping past patrols under false Dominion identification codes. The Dominion, still reeling from their loss at Earth, had no idea what was coming. By the time they realized the Tyrant's Bane had been compromised, it was too late. Human hackers had already infected the planet's orbital defense network, turning its automated gun platforms against its own fleet. Human saboteurs had already detonated key energy stations on the surface, causing planet-wide blackouts. And then, in one final act of devastation, the humans activated the Tyrant's Bane's self-destruct sequence, rigging it to detonate its entire plasma fuel core in a controlled chain reaction. Rourke's final transmission to Dominion High Command was simple. "Congratulations, you just lost another planet." And then Velrath ceased to exist. Panic in the Dominion. Back on the Dominion's capital world, the High Council was in chaos. The Supreme Warlord Zalzareth stood at the center of the council chambers, his mandibles flaring in fury. Around him, the gathered Dominion warlords argued and shouted, their arrogance replaced by something they had never felt before: fear. "The humans should have been wiped out," one counselor hissed. "They should have surrendered," another growled. "But they didn't," Zalzareth snarled, slamming a fist against the war table. "And now they hunt us." The chamber fell silent. The truth was undeniable. The Dominion had never lost a war before. They had never faced an enemy that didn't submit, that didn't break, that didn't fear them. And now they had awakened something worse than an enemy. They had awakened a predator. The hunt begins. Admiral Kasari stood aboard the Tyrant's Bane's new bridge. The ship was no longer Dominion property. It was humanity's first war prize, and it would not be their last. She turned to her officers. "We don't need to conquer the Dominion," she said. "We just need to break them." She looked at the galactic war map, her eyes narrowing. "They don't get a war anymore." She stepped forward, voice cold and ruthless. "They get extermination." The war had started as humanity's fight for survival. Now it was a hunt. The Dominion had ruled for 10,000 years. Its war fleets had turned entire civilizations to dust. Its armies had crushed countless rebellions. Its rulers had stood unchallenged, watching over the galaxy like gods. Until now. Because humanity had entered the war, and the Dominion was falling. Panic at the highest levels. Deep in the heart of Dominion space in the fortress city of Zalthar, the High Council was in shambles. The chamber, once a place of calm and control, had descended into screaming arguments and raw desperation. A holographic map of the Dominion flickered in the center of the war table. Red markers blinked across hundreds of systems, each one a lost planet, a destroyed fleet, or a rebellion. Supreme Warlord Zalzareth stood at the head of the table, his claws digging into the metal surface. His mandibles flared in fury, his reptilian eyes scanning the disaster unfolding before him. "This is impossible," a warlord roared. "No species could do this. No species could fight like this." Zalzareth's voice was low and seething. "And yet, they are." A trembling officer stepped forward, his scales pale with fear. "The humans have taken 7 more warships. They've hijacked our supply lines in the Outer Rim. Entire garrisons are going dark. Even our own soldiers are beginning to desert." Zalzareth's blood ran cold. This was not how war was supposed to go. The Dominion fought and others submitted. The Dominion crushed and others died. But the humans? They didn't break. They adapted. And they were doing something even worse than fighting. They were learning. The strike on Torvak was one of the most heavily fortified Dominion worlds in the entire Empire. It was a fortress planet guarded by 5 orbital defense stations, a fleet of 60 Dominion warships. It was impenetrable, or at least it was supposed to be. Humanity had other plans. Admiral Evelyn Kasari stood on the bridge of the Tyrant's Bane, her arms crossed as she watched the final preparations for the assault. Around her, human officers worked quickly, coordinating attack patterns, finalizing weapons calibrations, and setting the stage for what would become the largest ambush in the history of the war. At her side, Commander Daniel Rourke smirked. "You really think this is going to work?" Kasari's expression was ice cold. "It's already working." The Trojan Horse Maneuver. The Dominion fleet at Torvak received an incoming transmission from a badly damaged Dominion warship. "This is the Relentless Wrath, requesting emergency docking. We were ambushed by humans. Our crew is wounded." We need repairs immediately." The Dominion command station hesitated. The humans had never taken a warship intact before. There was no way they could have captured one, right? Moments later, the relentless Wrath was granted docking clearance. It was the last mistake the Dominion ever made. Because the moment the warship docked, hidden human strike teams inside the ship flooded the station, killing everyone in their path. Within minutes, the station's defense grid was completely disabled, and then the real attack began. The Tyrant's Bane and a fleet of hijacked Dominion warships, now fully under human control, dropped out of hyperspace. Before the Dominion defenders could react, the humans struck. The first wave of orbital stations exploded before they could even raise their shields. The second wave of Dominion warships fired on each other, their systems having been hacked by human operatives. The third wave tried to escape. None of them made it. In less than 40 minutes, the battle was over. Torvac had fallen. The broadcast that shook the galaxy across the Dominion, billions of citizens watched in horror as a human transmission hijacked every screen, every channel, and every holofeed. Admiral Kasari stood before a burning Dominion war banner, her uniform stained with battle scars, her expression one of pure steel and fire. "This war is no longer about survival," she said, her voice like a blade. "You came to exterminate us." Her eyes burned. "Now we're here to eradicate you." The transmission ended, and the Dominion panicked. The breaking point. The fall of Torvac sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For the first time, Dominion-ruled species saw their conquerors as vulnerable. Rebellions exploded across Dominion worlds. Slave species that had once feared the whip now rose up, armed with stolen Dominion weapons and driven by a new hope. Dominion officers once feared were hunted down in the streets. Dominion warships, once symbols of power, were now prizes for human captains. Dominion rule, once unbreakable, was falling apart. And in the middle of it all, humanity stood unstoppable. A desperate decision. Back in the Dominion's capital, Supreme Warlord Zalzareth sat in the ruins of his war council, silent for the first time in his life. His empire, the greatest power in the galaxy, was crumbling. His forces were in retreat. His people were beginning to doubt him. And then he realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a war anymore. It was a mass extinction event. Humanity wasn't here to win. They were here to end the Dominion forever. Zalzareth stood slowly, his claws curling into fists of rage. "We must surrender," one of his generals whispered. Zalzareth turned. His mandibles flared, his yellow eyes burned with hate. "No." His voice was like a death sentence. "We don't surrender." His claws tightened. "We kill them all." The Dominion had one last weapon. A final, desperate move that no one had ever dared use before. A planet killer. A weapon so devastating it could wipe out entire solar systems. A weapon so ancient and forbidden, even the Dominion had feared using it. But now, Zalzareth had no other choice. His eyes narrowed. "If they want to end us," he growled, "then we'll take the entire galaxy with us." The order was given. The weapon was activated, and across the stars a new kind of terror was unleashed. The Dominion was dying. Its war fleets were in ruins. Its armies were shattered. Its once mighty empire was being torn apart by rebellion, sabotage, and humanity's relentless vengeance. But the supreme warlord of the Dominion, Zalzareth, refused to accept defeat. If he could not rule the galaxy, he would burn it to the ground. And so he activated the weapon, the Doomsday device. Deep beneath the Dominion's homeworld of Zalthar, buried under layers of reinforced planetary armor, lay a weapon of unspeakable power. It was called the Eradicator, a star killer, an ancient superweapon built long before the Dominion had conquered the stars. It was not a bomb, it was not a fleet, it was a black hole generator. Once activated, it would consume entire solar systems, collapsing stars, devouring planets, and tearing space itself apart. Zalzareth stood in the central control room, surrounded by his most loyal warlords. His mandibles curled in a savage grin as he pressed his clawed hand against the ancient activation panel. A deep, inhuman hum echoed through the chamber as the machine awoke. One of his advisors trembled. "My lord, if we do this, there will be no galaxy left to rule." Zalzareth's eyes burned with fury. There will be no galaxy left for them to rule either. And then, the Eradicator came online. Across the galaxy, Dominion transmissions went dark. Stars began to flicker. Space itself seemed to shudder, and the humans knew something was very, very wrong. The final assault aboard the Tyrant's Bane, Admiral Evelyn Kasari watched in horror as the readings came in. The Dominion wasn't just trying to win the war anymore, they were trying to end reality itself. Kasari turned to her officers. "Get me Rourke, now." Moments later, Commander Daniel Rourke's face appeared on the screen. He was already in full battle gear, standing aboard a hijacked Dominion battlecruiser. His expression was grim. "You seeing this?" Rourke asked. Kasari nodded. "We stop this now, or there won't be anything left to fight for." She turned to her crew. "Set a course for Zalthar." The final battle had begun. The assault on Zalthar humanity had taken Dominion warships. They had learned to use their own weapons against them. Now they were bringing everything to Zalthar. The final human fleet, a Frankenstein's monster of stolen Dominion dreadnoughts, hacked warships, and human-engineered attack craft, burst out of hyperspace above the Dominion homeworld. They didn't arrive alone. They brought the rebellion with them. Dozens of enslaved species, once broken by the Dominion, had now joined the fight. The Dominion fleet, once the greatest armada in the galaxy, was outnumbered and outgunned for the first time in its history. And then the battle began. Fire in the void. The skies above Zalthar turned into hell. Human warships rained plasma fire onto the Dominion fleet. Hijacked Dominion dreadnoughts turned on their own kind. Rebel strike teams boarded Dominion stations, tearing through their forces with brutal precision. And at the heart of it all, the Tyrant's Bane spearheaded the assault, leading the charge toward the planet's surface. Admiral Kasari's voice echoed through the comms. "Rourke, you're up. Get in there and shut that thing down." The last stand, Rourke and his strike team launched in drop pods, crashing through the defenses of Zalthar's planetary fortress. Blaster fire tore through the halls as human commandos stormed the Dominion stronghold, cutting down warriors, hacking security systems, and pushing toward the Eradicator's control room. The Dominion fought with everything they had. But it wasn't enough. Rourke and his team breached the control chamber just as Zalzareth turned to face them. The Supreme Warlord snarled, his massive frame covered in ornate battle armor, his claws dripping with the blood of fallen rebels. "You think you've won?" Zalzareth growled. "You think you can stop this?" Rourke raised his rifle. "Yeah," and then they charged. The death of an empire. The battle was brutal. Zalzareth fought like a cornered beast, his claws tearing through human armor, his rage driving him to slaughter anyone who stood in his way. But humanity was done kneeling. Rourke dodged a wild slash, spun around, and emptied an entire magazine into the warlord's chest. Zalzareth staggered, his eyes wide in shock. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. And then, with a final gunshot to the head, the Supreme Warlord of the Dominion collapsed. The last ruler of the Dominion was dead. "The Eradicator is disabled," Rourke turned to his comms officer. "Shut it down." The team hacked into the Eradicator's core systems, overriding its failsafe protocols, killing the black hole generator before it could go critical. Across the galaxy, the stars stopped flickering. The void stopped trembling. The end of the world had been averted. The galaxy after the war. With their Supreme Warlord dead and their ultimate weapon disabled, the Dominion collapsed overnight. Rebel forces overran what remained of their empire. Dominion warlords surrendered or were executed. The once feared Dominion military was wiped out completely. And humanity? They didn't take territory. They didn't conquer. They hunted. One by one, they hunted down every last Dominion remnant, ensuring that the galaxy would never see their kind again. The war was over, and humanity had won. Epilogue: The New Galactic Order. Months later, Admiral Kasari stood before a massive gathering of rebel leaders, free species, and former slaves. Behind her, the remnants of the Tyrant's Bane, now a monument to humanity's victory, stood proudly above the ruins of Zalthar. She spoke, her voice calm and steady. The Dominion ruled with fear. She paused, scanning the crowd. They believed they were the apex predators of the galaxy. She smirked. They were wrong. She stepped forward. The galaxy belongs to the free now. A cheer erupted, shaking the heavens. And as the stars shined once more, one truth was clear. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never forget them. Ever.